So let me just jump right in then. So it's really great to have the opportunity to talk about this report now, a year later. So if we can go back to the first slide. Thank you. This is the cover of the report. The report is titled "The Integration of the Humanities and Arts with Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in Higher Education, Branches from the Same Tree." And I'll explain in a moment why we gave the report this title and why we emphasize branches from the same tree. But essentially, this effort by the National Academies was focused on examining a trend in higher education that we've noticed towards more intentional integration of the arts and humanities with science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine in education. And so just to take 1 second and tell you a little bit about the National Academies. So we're a nonprofit organization that was founded under President Abraham Lincoln, and so we've been around for a long time. And our reason for existence is to advise the nation, and in many instances, that means advising government on critical issues related to public policy, science, engineering, and medicine. And so the group that I work with here at the National Academies, we're focused on higher education and the workforce. And the way that we do our work is that we assemble committees of experts and leaders to come together and form an interdisciplinary group to take on a topic of importance to the nation. And so in this instance, we were looking at this movement in higher education. And I'll talk a little bit about the rationale for why we pursued this particular study, but I always like to talk about the fact that the way that we frame our work with the Board on Higher Education and Workforce is really related to a question, and that is, what does it mean to be educated in the 21st century? Or put another way, what should it mean to be educated in the 21st century? So in what ways does higher education need to adapt to the changing needs of students, employers, and really just the nation? So if we can go to the next slide. So branches from the same tree, this expression, it comes from a quote from Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein is quoted as saying, "All religions, arts, and sciences are branches from the same tree." And I included this picture here of this statue that is right outside the front of the National Academies building, this statue of Einstein. It's a huge statue. And one of the most wonderful things about it is that people who come to visit the National Academies, they can actually sit on the Einstein statue and take a picture. So in some ways, Einstein is like the patron saint of the National Academies. And this quote really spoke to the committee because it gets at the heart of what this report and what this study is all about. And that was the idea that, and where the committee ended up in its thinking, was that really today we tend to think of the arts and sciences as really fundamentally different forms of knowledge, when in fact, on some level, all forms of human inquiry are fundamentally connected. And the committee felt this was reflected beautifully in this Einstein quote, and is representative of the committee's thinking coming out of this process, this 2-year study that we undertook. So if we go to the next slide. So I always have to mention the sponsors. We're an organization that relies on support from outside sponsors, and so I do want to acknowledge the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Mellon Foundation for their support of this study. It has not historically been common for a National Academy of Sciences study to have support from the NEA and the NEH and the Mellon Foundation. But this was an unusual study in many wonderful ways, and so we feel that there's this powerful symbolism in the sponsorship of the study that gets at the heart of what the project is about, and about the sciences, humanities, arts coming together to think about what students really need from higher education, and how maybe we've lost some of the good foundation of a liberal education in the United States. If we go to the next slide. So this text is taken straight from the report, but this gives you a sense for our mission. So the study examined an important trend in higher education. efforts to return to, or in some cases to preserve, a more integrative model of higher education that proponents argue will better prepare students for work, life, and citizenship. This integrative model intentionally seeks to bridge the knowledge, modes of inquiry, and pedagogies from multiple disciplines, the humanities, the arts, sciences, engineering, technology, mathematics, and medicine, within the context of a single course or program. And I highlighted this text because I want to be clear that the study was not about looking at sort of what we think of as the general education curriculum. So it's not really about arguing that students should be sure to have, you know, an arts and a humanities course along with a science and an engineering course in their undergraduate studies. It's more about thinking about how we can bridge across those existing courses or develop new courses that bridge the knowledge from those disciplines in a really intentionally integrative way. And so, and these sorts of models, we found that they existed in individual courses, but also in programs that were designed, you know, with a series of courses that were connected. We find that we're finding more and more of these types of intentional approaches in higher education. And so this was, you know, inspired the study. So if we go to the next, thank you. So I mentioned that the study was conducted by this interdisciplinary committee of leaders and scholars. The study was led by Dr. David Skorton, who's a member of the National Academies. He's also the current secretary of the Smithsonian Institution and the previous president of Cornell. So he was just an absolutely fabulous leader for this study. He himself embodies what this work was all about. He's, in addition to being a physician, he's a musician, and he's someone who is passionate about higher education, given his background as a leader of an educational institution. So I did want to mention that. But at the heart of our statement of tasks, so what the committee was charged to do, is to examine the evidence behind the assertion that educational programs that mutually integrate learning experiences in the humanities and arts with science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine, we're called STEM with 2 M's. I know we're all tired of the acronyms, but what are you gonna do? Lead to improved educational and career outcomes for undergraduate and graduate students. So this project was really focused on student learning outcomes and what we can learn about how these more integrative models are impacting students. So if we go to the next slide. So one of our key findings, and this will come as no surprise to anyone, you know, participating in this symposium, is that there's incredible interest and enthusiasm in these new models, these innovative models. In some cases, they're not even new. Some institutions have been doing this for a long, long time, but in others, they're new innovative approaches. And we found this incredible groundswell of programs and courses at colleges and universities, and at really a diverse array of types of colleges and universities, which was pretty striking. So it wasn't like we only found these kinds of approaches at research universities or at liberal arts colleges. We saw them at community colleges. We saw them at technical colleges, at large comprehensives. Basically every type of sort of broadly speaking, college or university seemed to exhibit some movement in this direction. Maybe not every individual school, but within classifications of types of schools. And so I did want to mention that as the committee undertook this work, we began cataloging the courses and programs that we encountered. And we found over 200 examples, which we think really is just scratching the surface of everything that's out there. And I can basically say that with certainty, you know, after listening to some of the presentations today, that we haven't captured in this catalog. But this is a living document we're trying to build on. So I would encourage anyone you know, participating today that wants us to include the course or program that they're involved with in this catalog, this growing catalog, so that it's counted and it's acknowledged and it's shared with the community who care about these kinds of approaches. To just send me an email and reach out, and we'll add on to the list, because it's really incredible to see the vast array of different efforts that are going on. It seems that there's a sort of grassroots movement. So if we go to the next slide. as Greg mentioned, it's a pretty long report. It's a 300-page report. So I just wanted to give you some of the key findings, some of the high-level findings. But there's a lot of interest in there, and as I mentioned at the beginning, all of our reports are freely available. So I encourage you to go to the National Academies Press website and download the free PDF and read the whole report, because you're only going to get a taste of it from this presentation. But one of the key findings is, it's not particularly surprising, actually, is that we found that the integration of STEM content and pedagogies into curricula of students who are pursuing the humanities and arts, there's some evidence to suggest that it does improve science and technology literacy, which is one of the sort of rationales for the value of ensuring that students that plan to pursue the arts and humanities in their college major or professionally, people argue, well, they need to be exposed to science and engineering, technology, because it's important in today's society where we have such a reliance on science and technology, that everybody really understands and has a basic literacy in that knowledge. Well, by taking a more integrative approach, there is evidence to suggest that this science and technology literacy is improved. And then another not very surprising, but still worth mentioning, is that science and technology and medicine provide new tools and perspectives for artistic and humanistic scholarship and practice. So science and technology feed that artistic and creative process. So if we go to the next slide. Those findings maybe will not be that surprising to anyone. This finding I do think was surprising, and that is that we found that the aggregate evidence indicates that certain approaches that integrate the humanities and arts with science, engineering, and medicine have been associated with positive learning outcomes, and these positive learning outcomes include increased critical thinking abilities, higher order thinking and deeper learning, content mastery, problem solving, teamwork and communication skills, improved visuospatial reasoning, and general engagement and enjoyment of learning. So this sort of incredible list of positive learning outcomes. And what's surprising about this list, I think, and I'll mention a little later in the presentation, but I'll highlight it now, is that these are competencies that we know from research. Many higher education institutions are, many diverse higher education institutions all agree are learning outcomes they want all students to have, when they leave their college or university experience. And they're also outcomes and competencies that employers are increasingly asking for. There's a number of surveys surveys of employers that have yielded incredibly similar results in this sort of idea that employers, sure, they're looking for some technical skills, they value technical skills, but not to the exception of skills like critical thinking and ability to work well in teams and communication skills. And these are some of the skills that employers report they feel that college graduates are often deficient in. So we were surprised by this sort of alignment between these desired outcomes of employers and higher ed institutions and the outcomes of these integrative courses and programs. So if we go to the next slide. Another key finding, this relates to medicine. We found that the integration of arts and humanities with medical training is really, really common, actually. There are a great number of medical schools that have medical humanities programs. I think we looked at data from the American Association of Medical Colleges, and it's like 95% had either an elective or a required medical humanities program. So some of these programs have been studied. There's some research on this, and some of the outcomes that have been associated with the integration of arts and humanities with medical training include increased empathy among medical trainees and resilience, improved teamwork, actually some interesting improved visual diagnostic skills. So when medical students are given training in art observation, they actually improve some of their technical visual diagnostic skills. Also increased tolerance for ambiguity and increased interest in communication skills. So increased understanding of the importance of being a strong communicator. So these were other additional very interesting positive outcomes. Let's go to the next slide. So I mentioned this already a little bit, but these, what I mentioned before is that these integrative approaches that are yielding improved written and oral communication skills, teamwork skills, ethical decision making, critical thinking, ability to apply knowledge in real world settings, are these educational outcomes that many employers are asking for today, which we really thought was an important takeaway. Next slide, please. So the committee, so I just went through some of the key findings, but now I want to transition to some of the key recommendations. So the findings describe what the committee found when we reviewed the available research. The recommendations are sort of representative of what the committee as a body has concluded based on this available research. So where they ultimately ended up in their thinking. And so I wanted to mention this key recommendation. I think there's something like 17 recommendations, so I'm only going to talk about a few. But basically, although the evidence available on integrative models in higher education is there's not a comprehensive body of research. A lot of the research is new. Many of the experimental designs are imperfect. The committee still concluded that based on the available evidence, they felt that it's sufficient to urge the support and evaluation of courses and programs that integrate the arts and humanities with natural sciences, social sciences, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine and higher education. So although there's still a lot of research that remains to be done, the outcomes were striking enough that the committee felt confident urging support for more institutions that are interested in embracing this model to continue to do so, and as they experiment with these approaches, to evaluate them. So we can be collecting additional research as we are exploring new models that appear to be beneficial to students. Next slide, please. So this is related, but the committee recommended that for those institutions that have ongoing integrative programs, the committee recommends that that institutions should work to sustain them. We heard accounts of programs that came into being because of federal funding, federal support through NSF or NEH or NEA, that once the term of that grant ran out, the program or course disappeared. And so there's a role for institutional buy-in here to sustain these programs. And the committee felt like the general education program that we find in almost every college and university is an area that would be ripe for these sorts of innovative approaches, ways to re-envision general education so that it's not so much, you take the physics class over here and the art history class over there, but rather find ways to better integrate across these diverse forms of knowledge that students are being exposed to both highlight the connections between those forms of knowledge, but also in doing so to provide a kind of real world relevance. Many of the examples that we came across in integrating really highlighted how these different forms of knowledge apply in the real world, which unsurprisingly has a positive influence on students' interest and motivation. Next slide, please. This is again to the same point about general education. The general education programs are good places to start, and that there are various ways to take an integrative approach at different levels of integration, I guess you could say. Interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary integration can take different forms. Some a transdisciplinary integrative course could produce like a completely new framework and could even lead to the stimulation of a whole new discipline unto itself, whereas a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary course or program in which individuals come together to solve a problem from a particular disciplinary vantage point working together. It's a kind of different level of integration. Next slide, please. And so I guess there's so much I could say about this report, and time is limited. But I wanted to just close by saying that we saw the report, the report which came out, the study was conducted over 2 years. And published this spring. We really saw this as only the first phase of our work. And we are now launching a second 2-year phase focused on dissemination and outreach to raise awareness of the report's key findings and recommendations, but to importantly also focus on the implementation of the report's findings and recommendations. The findings and recommendations I just described, they're very high level, and I'm sure many people have questions about, like, how would this actually happen on my campus, in my institution? And the answers are complex and require a lot of people on the ground to weigh in. And so we plan to travel around the country over the next 2 years, hold sort of town hall meetings on campuses with groups that are interested in doing more integration to help facilitate their own process, and to brainstorm ways to overcome the many barriers that do exist to these sorts of integrative models, barriers that are administrative, cultural, budgetary, etc. And so I wanted to mention this because if anyone participating today wants to get involved in this, again, send me an email, because we do want to engage with you. We want to engage with anyone who's interested, and we look forward to the next phase of work. So I'm already running over time. I'm sorry about all the technical difficulties. I'll stop there. And Greg, you can tell me if I have any time for questions, but if not, I'm happy to connect with folks via email and continue the conversation. Thanks again.